So now the second thing I want to talk about is if you think about those vectors of change, particularly around AI, we've been doing a lot of investment in entities and communication analysis and using all kinds of sophisticated tools to understand the most complex thing of all, a real person. And so when you think about a real person, many of you guys are real people. You know, you started your day, you probably woke up with a cell phone alarm, maybe checked an email, got a Slack message, talked to the family, talked to your friends, maybe you sent some emails back to work, you sent a text message, maybe you commented on a small coding project, right? So you've started your day as a human, but then you started to do these things that kind of left sort of digital exhaust. Like every time you interacted the way humans are interacting with the world today, you leave a little bit of this digital exhaust every time you intersect with technology. And this digital exhaust is often sort of the breadcrumbs by which this community starts to piece together back who the real person was, what their motivation was, and ultimately what the facts are of any case, right? And so to talk about our next kind of innovation and what we think we can take with it and make you guys curious and help you guys get curious about what you can do in your worlds, I'd like to bring up Elise Tropiano, our Senior Product Manager of Analytics, to talk more about entities and communication analysis.
Yes. All right. Okay. So starting with our Larkspur Relativity 1 release, we've made it our mission to create order around the people in your data, the entities. So how have we done it? So first, we have a new analytic named Normalisation, which automatically identifies the entities that are communicating in your data, along with the aliases that they're communicating from. So if you need to locate all the communications that an individual received, you can do so safely knowing that we identified those aliases. And as part of this work, we also created a centralized place to store this entity's information. And this area is not meant to be static, right? So as you learn more information about these individuals, this area becomes constantly augmenting. This is your knowledge base of the people in your matters. And in our most recent Blazing Star Relativity 1 release, we are now visualizing the relationships across multiple entities so you can see who's talking to who's talking the most. And when you combine that with dashboarding, you can see things like what departments' communications look like, or what individuals are involved in talking about a particular topic, a particular concept. So to bring light to this, we are going to do a hypothetical investigation. The premise is that I am general counsel, and I'm investigating a rumor surrounding a Cheryl Nelson. The rumor is that Cheryl was terminated because she surfaced a report that made upper management look bad. And while Cheryl has not taken any legal action yet, we have to understand the risk of a potential wrongful termination suit, something that over half of corporations deal with every year, potentially costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we brought in Cheryl's inbox, as well as the inboxes of the employees that are around near Cheryl's departure, and we've run name normalization to identify those entities that are communicating in the data and their underlying aliases. And because this is a wrongful termination suit, or potential wrongful termination suit, we've also brought in the performance review information from our internal HR and performance management system. This may become a lens through which we can conduct our investigation. So we see the performance review information by department, and we also see the number of performance notices, terrible performance reviews, PIPs as we call them in the States, by department again, and we noticed something suspicious. This is interesting. IT support happens to be doling out a great number of these terrible performance reviews. I'm going to make note of that. So now let's bring up Cheryl here, just to confirm our understanding of her. We do know that she was also working in IT support. She was rightfully documented as having been underperforming at the time of her termination, and it looks like she got that terrible performance review in June of 2017. Okay, so we know two things, right? So we know that IT support is doling out these performance notices in egregious numbers, and we know that June 2017 could be a salient month that we steer our investigation with. Okay, we're going to dive into our documents.
Sounds good.
Okay. And we're going to use the results of name normalization to just focus on the communications that Cheryl received. And as we look at the results, we're also seeing a spike in the number of communications surrounding all these individuals that were given these terrible performance reviews. So we're going to filter on those communications as well to see if this lands on something. And so communication analysis is being drawn on these individuals' communications. And we see Cheryl here is talking to us, Sarah Shackleton. So we're going to focus on those communications. And we're going to open up just a communication between them. And lo and behold, Sarah Shackleton was collaborating with Cheryl to, quote unquote, tweak this report as a way of fabricating this potential wrongful termination case.
Awesome. All right, so what Elise just kind of demonstrated here is entities, name normalization, integrated right to review, right to kind of finding the smoking gun. And also, I think, enriching the data. So she looked at integrating not only the documents from Office 365, but also information from performance management systems, and it's the notion of enriching data that's really awesome. We would love to bring up one of our global investigative customers, Control Risks, Nancy Stevenson, to talk about their experience with entity and name normalization. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. The case study I'm going to present is not an unusual one. In fact, these are sometimes nuisances that you get from clients. Control Risks is a specialty consulting firm, and we help a number of international clients with investigations, disputes, and security, discovery, that type of thing. Earlier this year, the general counsel of one of these corporations contacted us because they had an employee problem, and he wondered whether or not we could get through this employee's data quickly. The employee was the administrative assistant to a local office leader and was in charge, actually, of making all of the conference arrangements, all the travel arrangements, all the hotel arrangements for this large office. And the admin had been flagged as potentially taking some perks from some of the vendors. And so they wanted us to investigate this and make sure that there was no misbehavior here or anything else. So we had a very small window. The GC arranged for us to image the employee's laptop and mobile phone. And when we got back to the office, we took that information, uploaded it to Relativity. This one person, of course, had 100,000 items in those two tranches of data. And so the very first thing we did is we went ahead and we said, okay, we have a limited amount of time here. Let's go ahead and try running the communication name normalcy against the data that's in her files, which we did. And we were able to see all the variants that you would expect to see in just running frequency lists. But we also saw the analytics pivoted off of other information that this employee had. So we got some other versions of this person's communications that we didn't expect. We also got different domains with whom she had been communicating. So we took those results. We did have a list of vendors and individuals that we expected that she would be communicating with. We took some of these new names back to the GC. We added those to the group. But we also decided to take a look at some of the concepts, just like in the example, and looked for words like gift, gift certificate, complementary, and found some additional names that, again, were not on the original list, and took those back to the GC. And so we narrowed our results down to a subset of documents that we thought they could use for purposes of establishing any case that they had. We ended up with 600 documents. So in a week, we took it from 100,000 documents down to 600 documents. Not the terabytes of data I'd like to be processing, but it took just as much time as it would if you took a large set of data and ran it through the same type of analysis. And it should really be incorporated into any kind of processing that you do in general because the results are so good. So that was basically it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and Nancy, can you share how you would have conducted this investigation without name normalization, communication analysis?
This is a hunt and peck type of thing. We would have run searches back and forth between three of the parties, the admin, a vendor, admin, another vendor, and then ultimately tried to figure out if there were any related entities that we needed to look at. It would have been much more difficult and taken much more time. Yeah.
Awesome.
And so, it also seems like you just scratched the surface in communication analysis. So how do you plan on continuing to use it?
I think anything with, anything that helps us identify names. You can I spent years in a law firm, and you can spend weeks rerunning your entire filters because you discover along the way that there are different names and different entities that you need to incorporate into your filters and into your searches to be inclusive and make sure you didn't miss anything. For privilege purposes, you can identify information between two people that you wouldn't necessarily expect. For purposes of redacting documents, for security, for GDPR, it's a good way of identifying names that, again, you wouldn't necessarily recognize. In investigations for OFAC, you get these blacklists that are generated on a regular basis, but those blacklists are being updated all the time. If you could, in advance, take a look at some of the potential risks that you have out there, you might be able to avoid sanctions in some cases. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. That was great to hear from you both. Thank you guys.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. So that was a look at entities and communication analysis integrated with review. And as many of you guys have heard with Relativity 1, analytics is included in Relativity 1. And so it's about thinking about all these different types of capabilities at any step of your investigative or review process. The next thing I want to talk about is back to that vector of change around mobility and what that's meant to the way humans interact throughout every piece of their life is now obviously creating all kinds of different information and communication flows that present challenges for investigators. To give you a piece of how this, to give you some insights on how this is sort of changing the landscape, it's both information from mobile phones, but just this notion of mobility has also certainly affected the way we work every day. Right now, today, Microsoft Teams has 329,000 enterprises using this product. Microsoft Teams is the new kind of chat product modeled after Slack. Microsoft has reported of all the products Microsoft has ever built in the history of Microsoft, it is by far the #1 fastest growing product they've had of all time. Slack has 10 million daily active users. They just went public a couple weeks ago. They have a mission to effectively be as ubiquitous as electricity in such that every organization, every app, every piece of flow that you rely on in an enterprise has some touch point either directly with Slack or via an integration, your call center routing, your Salesforce tickets, whatever you're doing is all kind of integrated in Slack. That is their mission around this notion of electricity. And then at the beginning of it all was this notion of text messages and WhatsApp messages and WeChat messages and Facebook messages and Snapchat messages and other kinds of messages. And what are we doing with all these messages? 23 billion messages sent a day. Right? And many of them, 80% of the people, in fact, in the United States that do text messaging also do it for business. Right? And so this is the landscape that we're operating in right now. To give you a look at what it's done just at Relativity, just in the last 12 months, we've sent more Slack messages and other kind of messages and comments around communications, twice as much, in fact, that we do email within the organization. And this number is mostly without our customer group and sales teams using Slack, who just have gotten onboarded in the last few months. So imagine what will be next year when all those folks are chatting about all the people in this room on Slack. And so this is not unique. This is a lot like many organizations where the amount of communication flow outside of email is in some cases a multiple, in some cases many multiples of what's happening in email. And some of these conversations happening here are unguarded, they're more informal. A bunch of executives interviewed by CNBC believe that these communications have the real nuggets in terms of finding out the motivations and things that are happening within an organization, whereas emails certainly can be a little bit more formal. They're not going to replace email, but the combination is now required to kind of find the truth of any matter. But I've kind of left the last vector of change in the industry to talk about the one that is probably the most impactful, the most transformative to the legal industry. One trend that promises to shake the very bedrock of common law, and that is emojis. Emojis are everywhere. They mean all kinds of different things. They're finding their ways into cases, and I'm only in half jest. What does this emoji mean? Is this person guilty? Is this person innocent? What did they mean when they threw an animated GIF into a conversation with a meme on it? What did that meme mean? Nobody knows what a meme means, right? And now we're actually having to kind of make sense of this information in the body of a review. And to kind of help make sense of this for us, I want to invite up Jim Whitty, our Senior Product Manager of Review at Relativity, to talk about everything we're doing in short messages. So Jim, welcome up.
Thanks, Chris.
So Jim, no, emojis aren't shaking the bedrock of common law, but short messages have been notoriously difficult to deal with in review. Why has it been so difficult?
Absolutely. There just hasn't been a good way to ingest, analyze, review, and produce this type of data in the past. If customers wanted to review short messages, they'd have to get creative or use a different tool altogether. And like you were pointing out before, more and more, these channels are being viewed as where the good stuff is happening, types of information sharing and conversations that will definitely make its way into a matter. So we wanted to make it easy for you to review short messages. And we've developed a new format that can be loaded directly into Relativity. It's known as the Relativity Short Message Format, or RSMF for short. No pun intended. I couldn't help myself. So by leveraging this format, you're able to take data from mobile, chat platforms, collaboration tools, and many, many more, and have it display in Relativity as you would see it in the native application. And this includes things like emojis, reactions, likes, and comments to provide that critical context in understanding your conversations. Also, we want to help the industry standardize on this format. So what we're doing is we're looking to integrate with a variety of different data sources to make it easier for you, our customers, to get data into Relativity. And as evidence of this, we're really excited to announce our first provider that we're integrating with. That would be Cellebrite. And we'd like to invite Shahaf Rozansky, the head of private sector for Cellebrite, to come on up here and talk a little bit more about our partnership and our integration. Welcome, Shahaf.
Welcome.
Welcome, Shah. Glad to have you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here in front of this amazing crowd, and thanks for working together with us to make a change in the e-discovery world. So for those of us that do not know Cellebrite well, so we are a leader at what we call digital intelligence, which eventually what means to our customers is the ability to harness the power of digital data. It goes in two manners. The first one is the ability to collect that information. So to collect the information from mobile devices, from cloud, from other devices. And the other manner is the ability to use that data, make sense out of it, investigate the data, and eventually get to your results. So we are mainly working with law enforcement. However, at the beginning of this year, we took a very important decision that we want to focus on the private market. We want to help law firms, we want to help service providers, we want to help corporates do more with digital data around e-discovery and corporate investigation, and this partnership is definitely a major step for us as part of that.
That's awesome. You guys want to show something?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. So what do you got?
Good. So I think that the best way, to describe what we are doing together and what we call the Cellebrite legal view is to talk about a fictitious case. A few weeks ago, the UK security authority got a note from a whistleblower that there is insider or trading based on inside information from a few employees of company A. Now, the security authority did its investigation, and eventually it's come into a place where it went into company A and said, listen, we have 3 employees that we believe that are the ones that are doing the inside trading, and therefore we want to get information from there. And based on the discussion with the general counsel of company A, it was decided that the phone of a person named John Adge will be taken as part of the investigation, will be reviewed. And now, John Adge have iPhone. And for those of you that might not know, iPhone is a really big challenge for the digital forensic world. Why is it a challenge? Because most of the solutions that are available today for collecting information from iOS devices doesn't bring all the information. And then what happens is that eventually the law firms or the general counsel comes to the service provider or to the in-house team that were doing the collection and asks them, listen, I was scrolling through the WhatsApp messages. I don't see that message in the output that he gave me. How come? Now, we mentioned that at Cellebrite, we put a lot of focus around mobile. Probably this is how you know us best. So we have a very unique solution that actually is capable of capturing that information out of iOS devices. And now you don't no longer need to worry about missing out a WhatsApp conversation, missing out a Facebook message, images, and so on and so forth. So back to our case, company that is excused at inside the training. 8 trading, and we are now taking the iPhone of John Edge, and we want to start processing it. We will look into Cellebrite UFED in order to collect the information. And what you can see over here is the fact that we are connected the device to the UFED. We are selecting what we would like to extract out of this iOS device, out of John's phones, and we are collecting the information and creating a forensic copy. Forensic copy, why does that matter? Because eventually we are dealing with evidence, something that we want to rely on, so we want to be sure that the extraction was done in the right manner. Once data was collected, now we are switching over to processing the data and preparing it toward the review platform, toward Relativity. So we are ingesting that into physical analyzer, and you can see in a second all the information that is available from the phone. You can see the chat messages, the SMS, the locations, the photos, all that were available on the phone itself. However, now we need to be a little bit cautious because, you know, while John might be accused at inside trading, it doesn't mean that we actually want to see what he was doing in his weekend. It's not fair. We are not controlling his privacy. So there are 2 ways to address that. One of those is to do it while we are collecting the data and only collecting relevant piece. And it is possible as part of the UFED software that we've just seen. But another way that we will just demonstrate is the ability to select just the relevant data. And in this case, we just wanted information or the WhatsApp conversation between John and James Bond. And this is the only piece that we will collect and export into the Relativity short message format. So it will be available for a review later on. So keeping the customer or the custodian privacy is very important. So now that we have the information, I'm handing it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
So we've released our Relativity short message capability in our Blazing Star Relativity 1 release. So it's just been out for a couple months. But now that I've taken this data, as soon as it's done exporting here, done, awesome, I'm able to process this using Relativity's processing engine. So directly into Relativity, very minimal hops in terms of taking data from Cellebrite directly into our platform. And let's take a look at what that looks like. Here we can hover over participants, the platform, the conversation, and get more information about the collection that just took place. We also have the ability to embed attachments. So things like voicemails, where we really get a 360-degree view of all the different components that happen in a conversation. And by using processing, we're able to extract metadata, assign families, do everything that relativity processing is able to do. Let's also keep scrolling down a little bit so you can see things like emojis and avatars. Oh, it looks like our culprits were enjoying a little post-dirty deed celebration with an animated meme here. I don't know what a meme is, but I think that's a good example of it. Let's also take a look at some of the tools that we've built. So we have a timeline that you can use to drill into the conversation and easily navigate and get to certain parts of it with just one click. But it's not just a tool for navigating. It's also a tool that you can use to bubble up relevant information, like search hits. And it's not just vanilla search hits. It's really complicated things like an emoji in a proximity search. Yes. So here we can see our culprits had used the money bag symbol to sort of to infer certain things, and we're able to build that into a proximity search, which is really powerful. And then last but not least, the data doesn't do any good if we can't get it out of Relativity. So we're able to image, redact, brand, and produce it with all of the tools that you have available in the Relativity platform. So just to kind of close up here, we were able to go from a device, mobile collection, all the way to production. That's a really powerful workflow.
Absolutely.
Awesome. What's next for the partnership?
So obviously we want to do more, and this is just the early bird of what we are doing. We want to make the process more streamlined, more data ingested, make it more easy for you to eventually analyze the information within Relativity. These are part of the things that we are currently thinking together how we can do better for the discovery world.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. Really, really powerful stuff. We're going to be here all day. I hope that sparks some curiosity. I would love. I'm sure Cellebrite and us. We'd love to hear some of your ideas about how we can make this even more ubiquitous. When everybody has this kind of power in their hands, how many more text messages will make their way into discovery processes? How many more Slack messages will make their way? How will we help people find justice in more and more of these areas? So this is really, really exciting stuff built natively into the review platform of Relativity. The last thing I want to kind of walk through here is, if you think about, we've talked about analytics, we've talked about short messages, we've talked about user experience, addressing the major kind of momentum, the major vectors of change in our industry, and we've talked about them in managing those things from an e-discovery standpoint. But the next logical step is, how do I use this information, this great power around analytics, this great power around review, this great power around understanding short messages, and how do I use that proactively in proactive compliance and monitoring solutions so that we can prevent some of this behavior or catch it early enough to avoid some of the major complications of it proliferating downstream? And why is that important? From talking with the industry over the last 10 years, from meeting with many of you and kind of all the work that you're doing, there's been a sea change since the financial crisis of 2008. There's been tighter regulations. In fact, there's been over $320 billion of fines levied. The 80 billion in fines expected in the next year, just in the financial surveillance kind of area, just in the space around ensuring that we have more lawful practices in all these kind of key areas that affect everybody in society. And just this last week, we've had 5 banks in Europe also kind of get a pretty big fine in areas that I'm sure that they would have liked to prevent and ensure that they had better practices in. And there are things that, like, if you connect real time, there are ways to prevent this activity that are not so unobvious. So this is an example from a Bloomberg chat that was caught late last year. So some things take algorithm upon algorithm, multiple AI models to figure out. Some things don't. Some things you just need to be watching, right? So I'd like to bring up Jordan Domash, our general manager of Relativity Trace, our new product built specifically for this use case. Welcome, Jordan.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Relativity Trace is our new application built on top of Relativity, specifically for proactive compliance monitoring. We've seen a lot of momentum since the launch just last year. We have customers running in production at scale using Relativity to proactively detect criminal behavior happening in their organization. And I'm excited today to announce 2 launch partners, Deloitte and FTI. Both Deloitte and FTI have deep experience supporting their customers around processes and technology around different compliance problems. That, combined with their global reach with Relativity One, will allow them to support customers and customers of Relativity Trace getting ahead of this non-compliant behavior and getting ahead of risk in their business. When we think of Relativity Trace, we're not talking about e-discovery here. We're really talking about getting ahead of different behaviors. The best time to use Relativity Trace is when there is a specific behavior in your organization that you want to get ahead of. And there is a defined set of individuals who you know are at risk of that behavior that can have a major impact on your business. When we think about what the workflow that Relativity Trace powers, there's a few steps in that process. The first is automated ingestion. We have the ability to capture a variety of email, chat, and audio data sources and bring all of that content into Relativity One automatically. We have the ability to extract the text and metadata and index all of those communications so they're search ready. You then can create a set of rules that define the content that is relevant to you. And all of these rules, once they're enabled, they generate alerts. The compliance review team just focuses their energy on the alerts that have been generated for you. And what's really powerful is the alerts are fed back to the Trace rules engine. And with machine learning, the rules are getting smarter and smarter over time, leveraging all the analytics we've invested in over the last 10 years across the Relativity platform. And from an email being sent to an alert being generated, that all happens without any manual manipulation of the data. And we support 40 data sources out of the box. Email, financial chat platforms like Bloomberg and Thomson Reuters Chat, enterprise chat platforms like Skype and Teams and Slack. We have the ability to capture all of these data sources and programmatically bring them into Relativity. Our most popular data source is Office 365. To set up an Office 365 data source in Relativity Trace, the first thing that you have to do is just create a new data source, give it a name, and select the type of data source. In this case, it's our Exchange EWS connector. You then set up an integration point profile. For those that aren't familiar with Relativity integration points is how we configure the field mapping, so how data from Office 365 will get loaded into Relativity 1. You set up a username and password, so we're authenticating directly to the Office 365 instance. There's also a monitored individual object. The monitored individual object is where we store all of the metadata around the specific individuals that we're going to be monitoring. You just get an export from the client system, from the HR database, load that into Relativity along with all of the metadata around those individuals. And once they're linked to the data sources, we'll be pulling their communications directly into Relativity 1 via Relativity Trace. Once the Office 365 data source is enabled, anytime someone sends or receives an email, it's going to be pushed directly to Relativity, where we will alert on that content automatically. And we're not just talking about email. We have a data source for Bloomberg, as we called out. And our Bloomberg data source is RSMF compatible. So all of the innovation that we've invested into the platform with our new short message viewer, you can use in Relativity Trace. We can now review Bloomberg messages directly in their native format. And there's lots of ways to get notified about an alert, right? Obviously, you can look at tagged documents in Relativity, but there's also email notification, Slack notification, and mobile notification with the new Relativity 1 mobile app. So if you're a senior compliance officer and you want to get notified of your highest risk content on the go, you can get that sent directly to your phone. And it's not just financial services where Relativity Trace can be helpful. Any type of bad criminal behavior, anti-competitive behavior, collusion, price fixing, money laundering. There's lots of use cases where Relativity Trace can help you get ahead of that bad activity, detect it right away, so you can quickly investigate it and take corrective action. Thanks.
That's awesome, Jordan. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So I hope you can kind of see there what we presented with Relativity Trace. It's accessing some of these same data sources we access for e-discovery, but now real time, always on, always monitoring, always automated. Really, really exceptional stuff that many of you in the community have actually helped us kind of like envision and innovate on, and very excited to kind of bring it to market. So we've talked about a lot today. I'm about to kick you off into the next set of sessions. You can see there's a lot of areas that we're investing to kind of address these vectors of change in our industry. We're super excited about it, and I want to do one last thing, which is ultimately thank you and thank every one of you for being here today. I know from Andrew, from Steve, from all the presenters that came up here, we're really excited to work with you today. There's about 40-ish Relativity folks around here today that would love to kind of talk with you and learn more about all of your needs. So with that, thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you the rest of the day.